in 5 seconds.
So, yeah, welcome everybody. Today we wanted to talk about startups and the startup ecosystem in the blockchain area, of course, with a focus on Germany, but could also discuss other countries around us, of course. And primarily we wanted to talk to people in the startup ecosystem who have been in touch with multiple startups in the last years, talking about is it possible at all to identify highly growing startups in advance? Is this possible? Is it not possible? What are unicorns? Is it possible to identify them in advance? What are possibilities to identify valuable startups, and what should startup founders do right to basically match this pattern, right? That's basically what we wanted to talk about today. And with this, I would like to directly hand over to everybody here in the panel and asking about you as a person. Who are you and what is the company you're doing? And I think maybe Alexander, let's start with you. Who are you and what is the context you are working in?
Well, I'm Alex Frankenberg, Managing Director of the High-Tech Gründer Fund. We are a seed investor, and we have done in the last 16 years 640 seed investments, which is an average of 40 per year. And we're also a huge fan of the crypto space. I'm personally a huge fan, especially of the Bitcoin space, because I think it's a really interesting technology and solution to uncontrolled money printing. And as a seed investor, we have almost 2 unicorns in our portfolio. The first one was a life science unicorn in December that we sold, and we just had the IPO of Mr. Specs on Friday, and it's close to unicorn territory, not exactly. And which is actually worse, we have 4 unicorns in our what we call anti-portfolio. That's the portfolio that we declined. So we're experts in recognizing unicorns and declining unicorns.
Good to know. But anyway, I think HTGF is a good has a good reputation by now as a venture capital fund, right? Okay, maybe over to you, Benjamin. What's your mission and who are you?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Benjamin. I'm the managing director of BlockRocket. So we are an accelerator for blockchain startups. We focus only on blockchain startups and in the earliest stages, so pre-seed and seed. So basically, very young teams in terms of like sometimes just a pitch deck, an idea, and we try to spot if they are actually tackling a problem that's really existing, and if they use blockchain in a way that we think is a good way of solving a problem that couldn't be solved before. We analyze teams and we invest up to 250,000 euros in startups that then hopefully bigger investors like Alex and HTGF or others later on also join for investments. And yeah, we basically try to pick the best ideas in the space.
Perfect. Do you have a unicorn in your portfolio so far?
Not yet, but it went up 3 times 4, I would say, since last year. So let's see how fast we can keep up with the growth. So you got to ask me again in a year or two, then you will know.
Maybe 2 years. Excellent. Okay. Yeah, Wolfgang, what about you and what's the company you're working for? Of course, I know this company. I'm also in the board of directors. I think that should be known, but maybe you also present yourself briefly.
Yes, hi, good afternoon. It's Wolfgang. I'm a partner at the Blockchain Founders Group, and we are both a company builder and a venture capital firm based in Liechtenstein. Personally, I've been in the venture capital and private equity space for over 20 years. But although this may sound like a long time, I have only dived into the blockchain world about 2 years ago. And I've been told by Philip and many others that 2 years in blockchain is at least 10 years in real life. And I must admit, it sometimes feels like that. Glad to be on the panel today, and I'm curious how we can identify a unicorn.
If this is possible, right? Who knows? Excellent, thanks. And then Matthew, over to you. You are a fast-growing startup, but please also tell us more about you and your company, please.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I guess I'm the oddball out here, or the odd duck in the group as a startup. That's I like to call us an early growth stage company. At the moment, we've started about 5 years ago at Settlement, and we've grown to a team across Europe, Middle East, Africa, India, and Singapore to about 43 people to date. One thing that's important to know about Settlement is that we're traditionally funded, so we haven't done a token sale of any sort. We have grown to date. We've raised around 7.7 million euros to date. Half of that was through grants and half was through VCs. So that's a bit of the background. What do we do exactly in the blockchain space? If you look at depending on the cycle of cryptocurrencies, blockchain usually looks like either something that you should stay away from or something that's a gold rush. In the gold rush, we're the company selling the picks, the shovels, and the wash pans. So what we do is infrastructure support for blockchain projects to get started.
Excellent. Thanks very much. And maybe let's directly dive into the topic. And first of all, we have to admit that the blockchain world works a little bit different because here we not just have brute force startups running on equity, right? We also have decentral protocols having been launched by central companies, of course, but still having become decentral here and there. And we have token issuances where tokens are issued on top of equity, right? So who would like to shed a little bit more light on the types of startups we have in the blockchain ecosystem? Matthew, maybe you would like to start here?
Yeah, sure. So definitely, as you mentioned, Philip, there's no shortage of companies that are launching decentralized protocols that are let's say the lifeblood of those are the cryptocurrency that they're launching, whether that's something that's based on another protocol or is in the form of or something that's let's say a original token for a specific protocol, or an ERC 20 or ERC 721, some kind of a variant that works on another protocol. So there's one big group, of course, that are the open source protocols like that. There are other companies in the space that are more where the camp that we're in, and that's more of a traditional business model where we provide licensed software to companies that want to do things with blockchain technology. And I would say maybe somewhere in the middle. And so we are, as mentioned in the intro, kind of an infrastructure support, a low-code platform for building blockchain apps. There are, of course, other companies that are more traditionally funded, but build specific blockchain applications. So for one vertical, be that, for example, KYC on blockchain or a trade finance solution for blockchain. And you see a lot of consortia that are operating on permission networks like Contour and Congo and so forth. These are companies that are servicing the needs of organizations with a specific use case domain. So it's quite diverse, but I think the question of the day about how to, are there opportunities for unicorns in those different sectors? I think that the answer is definitely yes. In the decentralized protocols, there's obviously lots of examples that we see in the news. There's in the let's say vertical application space, I'm not sure that we have any yet. In the space of platform, there's one that's they're already halfway there out of the US called Alchemy. So they're a traditionally VC funded company. They've raised their last round about 2 months ago was for 80 million at a valuation of 505 million. So there are companies in that platform play like us that are getting close, halfway there for Alchemy. We're quite a bit further away from that, but hoping to get there too.
Excellent. I think that was a very good overview. Benjamin, what kind of startups are you currently seeing? And I also know from, we talked about it previously, that you have also inspected, like tons of white papers a couple of years ago when we had the ICO hype. So maybe you would also contrast what you're seeing now with what you saw at that time.
I mean, I think it's two different, a bit like almost two different worlds. So like on the one side, you have a lot of ICO projects. I think the most successful ones so far are usually the main protocols like Ethereum or Polkadot or like Chainlink or others. We have reviewed with an ITSA, it's an association that deals with reclassified white papers and tokens into categories 2-3 years ago. And myself, I was involved in reviewing 200 or 300 white paper back then. This was a little bit after the big ICO bubble or ICO crash. And the dynamics of those are very different because they usually don't go to VCs or to institutional investors to raise money. but they usually have some sort of token they bring to the market, and they want to it's more like a crowd-funded version of trying to get funds. And the quality of what we have seen there, I remember I went through numbers of 300 to 500 on the coin market cap list 2-3 years ago. And it was a lot of very low quality business plans, sometimes even spelling mistakes or business cases that said they would solve 20 problems at the same time. What we're doing at BlockRocket is we look more for classical investments, so for equity investments, and it's startups that are in the blockchain space, but usually they don't even run their own token or their own protocol. They just are part of the blockchain ecosystem, solving some problems relating to that. And what we can see here is mostly 2 different areas the last 2 years. I would say it's one huge cluster is everything with decentralized finance, so not protocols itself, but relating to financial markets, financial solutions. And one thing that we've seen this year more increasingly is NFTs, everything that goes to NFTs, tokenizations, related to art, music, rights, etc. And then there's, of course, some outliers that are not related to NFTs or not related to DeFi right now. And those we also find very interesting. But that's the impression we have so far.
Okay, excellent. And maybe Wolfgang and Alexander, how are you assessing startups? How are you appraising their materials? How are you conducting due diligence to then come up with an opinion whether you basically want to invest, whether you attribute a high valuation to this company or not? What's important here from an investor's perspective? Alexander, you would like to start?
Yeah,
or would you?
I can start. I think there's a number of answers you can give. I think the most important, of course, is the team, because these are the people who drive it. So if they are smart, if they're complementary, if they are ambitious, I guess that's the key success for. And I think I asked myself a while ago, what's within the team? What's the most important aspect? Is it intelligence or the education or the compositance, the gender mix? And we found the most important aspect of the team is the ability to change the direction, because especially at the very early phase, usually the direction they're going initially is not the best direction. It's maybe even a wrong direction. So the difference between a good team and a not so good team is the not so good team continues, although they realize maybe it's not the best direction, and the good team, they change the direction. And I think that's the most difficult part to assess. Will they be able to admit to themselves that's the wrong path? I will change the path. And maybe the second most important aspect within the team is ambition. And I think that's the link to the title of the whole of the conference. And we've seen many teams that are not ambitious enough. They don't have the great vision. They're not really convinced that they can grow a big business. Maybe they don't have the capability. And I think that's a big issue, because if you don't have the ambition and the conviction, the good teams, the good companies, they get early offers because someone else spots that's a great company. I would like to buy it for 20 million, for 50 million. And once you sell for 50 million, you'll never have a unicorn. So I think the most important, one of the most important aspects of achieving unicorn status is to not sell before you are a unicorn. And for that, you need the ambition and the conviction within the founder team, and of course the other shareholders, to stay on board.
Interesting points. Wolfgang, you would like to add?
Yeah, it's probably no surprise that I go in exactly the same direction as Alex. I mean, as the old saying goes, having an idea is no solution. Having just an idea is no solution. Everything depends on execution. I used to start looking at the business models. Now I start looking at the management teams, and I really try to understand their agenda, why they are doing it. I mean, also one thing you want to check out is, what is their plan B? Alex mentioned ambition. So they're really burning for this idea, and they want to make it happen. And we want them to think about it 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And it does, I mean, we talk about unicorns here. Although it sometimes seems like it, unicorns don't happen overnight. And when you look at Coinbase, they started in 2012 and they went public only 9 years later. As far as I know, they didn't have any ICO or other funding in the meantime. They had traditional venture capital funding. Now, I'm sure in these 12 years, in these 9 years, many things have changed. And when they started with the idea, I think it wasn't the same image as it is now. So it takes a lot of resilience, a lot of stamina, a lot of passion for founder teams to realize their vision, and that's what I'm really interested in. So the business idea is one thing; it has to work. The interdependency have to allow the company to act on their own and not just be reliant on other players, and also to be fully scalable. But the key issue is just the quality of the management team. And you would look at serial entrepreneurs, but unfortunately, there aren't so many serial entrepreneurs out there. And even the serial entrepreneurs, they were first-time entrepreneurs at one stage. So just to count on that is not enough. But you have to get to know the team, and you have to make up your mind. Will they change the industry? Will they change the world or not?
Just very briefly to add one aspect, one of our fund investors always says it takes 10 years to create an overnight success. And that's really the time frame that we see, plus minus 2 years. It takes 8 to 12 years to create a large company. And I think 10 years when you're a young founder in the 20s or even early 30s is a lot. It's half your life, almost. And I think the endurance to run the ultra marathon over 10 years, I think is a very important aspect.
And just to build on that, I mean, fervent, burning management teams is one thing, but they also have to be realistic. And you can have, I mean, if you remember Theranos, that used to be a unicorn as well. And it was because the founder just had this incredible in a literally sense to win, and therefore the border to fraud was open, and that's what happened. So as Alex said, the investors, the management team has to be open to get feedback, to get coaching, to talk about the idea if circumstances change.
Excellent points. So, but what makes up the perfect founders team? Because you cannot design the perfect team as you would like to have it. You have to also take what's out there, right? So, is the perfect founder? Is he alone? Is he a team? Is he, I don't know, 25 years, 35, 45? Is he a business guy, tech guy? Is he having a family or not? Who knows? So what are there any nice to have criteria or must criteria that would signal to all of you, okay, that's a winning team?
So we have looked at the properties of the good founder teams, and there's some commonalities. They're not, I mean, they're not a law. They're not true for every situation, but typically it's a team, 2 or 3. But then, of course, you see many single founders who are very successful also, but in a team environment, you're more successful. And regarding the age, we've seen in the B2C space, it's better if the founders are younger, in their 20s. In the B2B space, the optimal age of the average age of the founder team is around 40 plus minus. Of course, there's other examples that the founder of McDonald's was like 60 plus when he founded McDonald's. But usually they're like in that age bracket, and I think one skill that the founders are they need to be able to sell and pull in other people. They need to be I guess great leaders and convince great talents to follow them building the company.
Yeah. Who wants to add something here? Benjamin?
I would also say it depends on the industries. I mean, if you look at Silicon Valley, at many social media startups, like from Instagram to Facebook, whatever, I would say it's kind of industry insights, and industry insights relates to just time, but not time for the sake of time, but time for the sake of experience. Like you having spent a certain amount of time in the industry to understand their perception of pain points better. And I would argue if you're in your early 20s, then you probably have a much better understanding for how social media works. than if you maybe want to build like a B2B platform and you need to know like how does the industry like inside actually work and not looking from it outside. Like if I look at TikTok, for example, I'm in my late 20s, right? And I already feel old. So that's also kind of a new experience for me because I have a sister who's 15. She's using TikTok and I don't really understand it from a user standpoint anymore. And I think, so maybe I'm already too old for the next TikTok, for example.
That sounds
Jesus,
interesting.
if Benjamin is too old.
For the next TikTok, yeah.
Sorry, Matthew, you go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that it definitely, I can speak to the B2B space, and in terms of having a team that, I would echo what Alex said about the age category, but it's not about the age per se, it's about the industry experience. As a startup, you had to sell every day, every night. And if you don't talk the talk of the industry, then you're not going to be able to walk with them. So it's really important for B2B SaaS and for IT and tech solutions that at Settlement we focused a lot on financial services because I got 15 years experience in banking. So does that mean that our technology is banking specific? Hell no. We have other team members that are focused on telco, other ones that are focused on discrete manufacturing, but getting senior people, inspiring as a leader of a company, and I don't say I'm a model to follow, but inspiring people about the overarching vision for what you want to do. And in our case, that's accelerate blockchain adoption by 3 years globally, but get that vision, get the people that are can buy into that vision, and have people in the team, early hires that can sell into other sectors. And when, in our case, where it's more of an infrastructure, where they can talk the talk, and then you can do business. So that for B2B space, it's really important that there is industry experience and that you build a team around the sectors that you want to focus on.
Mm-hmm. Couldn't agree more. I mean, the domain know-how of the team is just critical. Yes, that there are examples of startups that have been successful because they had absolutely no domain know-how. I mean, I know of the wine tasting sort of shop where the founder had no idea of the wine industry. But that's easy to comprehend and easy to understand. But as Matthew, you were pointing out, I mean, if you're building a financial system in the banking space and you don't speak the banking language, so to speak, you won't be an insider. And that is just critical important. Doesn't mean that everybody has to come from the same space, but you have to have one thought leader who absolutely understands the industry.
I think to switch away from the team, I think what's also very important that they address a big opportunity, a big actual or potential market, and that they solve a significant problem. And especially if the market opportunity is a new market, not established market, you need strong vision and vision what the market could be in the future. But it needs to be large, very large, because a unicorn, typically they don't have large market shares, maybe 5% or 10, that would be a lot. So in order to create a business that's valued 1 billion plus, it needs to fit in a large market. And I think that's an issue with many founders. They sometimes think too much in incremental innovation, like improving something, which is totally okay. And it could be very profitable investment in business, but then it would be too small to grow really big.
Okay, interesting point. So what do you think? Blockchain technology is also having like a specific cycle, right? So the technology was invented some 10 years ago, and some 5 years ago, at that point of time, people said that we are now in the stage of let's call it the iPhone 1, like that was 4 years ago. And if we now look at crypto and enterprise solutions, to be honest, we are still in the iPhone 1 age, right? So not too much has maybe one iPhone 1.1, if this would exist. But the cycle is developing extremely slowly, I would feel, and it's accelerating a little bit. This would be also my observation. And probably this will go on for the next 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. But that's the cycle I have in mind, right? How is the technology cycle in your mind concerning blockchain technology? Is it similar? Are we still at the very, very beginning, or have we progressed more based on your observations. Maybe Matthew, what's your observation here?
Yeah, and there is a bit of difference, of course, from a geographic perspective on countries that are moving faster than others. The Gartner research showed that in 2019, only about 5% of companies that are experimenting with blockchain technology are putting it into production. So 95% are not going ahead with it. In 2020, the same study showed about 14% going into production. So there's a 3x increase in the number of companies that are going from a research activity to production. And I expect, based on what I see, this is globally speaking, and I'll get into country level, but I expect that this year the same study will show that 20 to 24% are going into production with it. So there's that adoption is coming. It does take a lot of time. And if you look at geographies like the US, the propensity to go into production is only around 5 to 6%. So there's a lot of R&D activity happening. And I'm talking enterprise space here. I should qualify what I'm saying. But the enterprise space is just 5-6% that are going into production. Europe is around 8%. The APAC is around 12 to 15%. So there's a big, and I think a lot of that has to do, on the one hand, with legislation that's in place. Europe, I think it is, although we may feel like we're moving very slow, at least regulatory frameworks are being put in place that companies can feel comfortable to start to work with new tech. And in APAC, where the propensity to go to production is the highest, they aren't saddled by as much legacy infrastructure as other parts of the world. And I'm talking here specifically about Southeast Asia. So there's different dynamics in different markets, but it is taking time, and it will, I would second that, Philip, that it will take 10, 15 years before we can say that we're at mainstream adoption. And by default, we are at the early days still. I think I often refer to like the early days of the internet when we had yellow pages for URLs. We really did not understand how we would use the internet at that point in time. And I think we're maybe a small step past the yellow pages, but not very far.
Okay. What's your opinion, Benjamin, Wolfgang, Alex?
Maybe from my perspective, so I think it depends, first of all, like what industry we're looking at. So I mean, if you, for example, look into the DeFi space, where there's like with protocols and little regulation, we have more than $50 billion. I just checked, more than $50 billion that's locked right now in terms of capital, right? That within like less than 2 years basically came out of nothing. So we can see a lot of applications where I think it grows much faster than other areas. I think the gaming industry, for example, as a whole is also much more fast-paced than, maybe conventional banking systems. So I would make it a bit dependent on the industries. And I mean, of course, compared to the potential, what we believe that technology like still enables us for use cases, I would also say we're still at the very beginning. But we could definitely see that some of the projects took quite a fast pace in the last 2 years, in my opinion, or in our observation.
I totally agree. I think what Matthew just said, the comparison with the internet, I think that's the right perspective, because we've seen charts on Twitter where the number of crypto users is compared to the number of internet users. And I think the charts point to a point in time where we're like in 1995. So I think that's where we are. We're coming out of the very technical, very geeky, very, very early adoption phase into early mainstream. And I think if you take the year 1995 or maybe 7, around that, we see companies like Amazon are just founded, like they're just starting to grow really quickly. And many companies like Google and Facebook and maybe even eBay and Uber and all of these companies are not founded yet. So that's the great case for early stage investing, because I think these companies will be founded, and it's the great art to find and fund them and make them grow. But I think that's just about the phase. We are very, very early, and we have, just like the internet, we have like, I think 20, 30, 50 years, very rapid growth ahead of us.
How many years again, please, Alexander? How many years?
20, 30, and maybe even 50 years, because I think we don't see the internet slowing down, the internet growth and expansion yet. And we're like 25 years into the expansion phase. And I think that the same thing will happen. It might develop differently because the internet is all about information, and blockchain is more about value, and it's more tricky value. If you lose information, it's not so bad. If you lose value, that's quite bad. So it might develop a little bit differently, but then on the other hand, there might be accelerating elements also. So I think really the comparison is the very early pre-2000 internet phase. That's where we are.
Yeah, to build on that, I think it's true as always. People overestimate how long it takes, and underestimate the impact. And I've been in my 30s when the internet bubble happened, and the phase between 1995 and 2000 was considered as the big internet period. But if you look what happened, especially with the introduction of the mobile phone, I mean, the whole idea of internet got taken to a completely new level in the 20 years after 2000. And I remember, because I started in venture capital in 2000, and there was a dry period after the market crash. That's why we all went over to management buyouts. But it took three or 4 years until the market took up again, but it has never ever stopped since then. And I fully agree. It's 1995 here in blockchain, and I know it's anecdotal evidence, but just a few of my friends outside of the bubble have heard of blockchain. They have heard about Bitcoin, but they don't really know where to buy it. But they know nothing about blockchain.
It's interesting because I personally think that we are still early, but maybe the entire cycle time could be 20 years, but it's extremely speculative. Nobody knows what goes on. And then I also question myself, have the unicorns in blockchain, have they maybe already been founded and we don't see them yet because they are so small? Or will they be founded in the next 2, 3, 4 years? And if Alex is right and you, Wolfgang, then there would still be 10 years to go when unicorns could be founded, such that then they become unicorns in plus 20 years from now. That's 2040, right? But we cannot really find the truth here because it's highly speculative. But I think it's interesting to speculate a little bit about the cycle time.
I think what we see areas where the adoption is really, really accelerating, and what Benjamin just said about DeFi, and all of a sudden you have lots of value locked in DeFi and many interesting solutions, and it's really accelerating very rapidly. On the other hand, I think there will be applications that will take time. So storing your property rights on the blockchain and not in the German Grundbuch, I think that will take a long time, because especially in Germany, it will take forever until the administration, the laws, and also the processes, the administrations will change, because we are extremely slow adopter in general in IT technology. You can see it everywhere. So I think there will be both, and it will of course differ regionally. I mean, you've seen El Salvador adopting Bitcoin as currency. So maybe we see a very, very rapid adoption with like store value and payment, and maybe other things connected to Bitcoin in a surprising region. Who knew El Salvador before?
Can I maybe add something on that?
Yeah.
One other thing, I remember back in 2015, 2016, there was an announcement by a payment processing company in Japan that they were going to enable all of their POS systems with the ability to accept cryptocurrency. So overnight, you had 150,000 companies across Japan that could accept it. Now, the actual adoption of it is another thing, but I think that these kind of, as the infrastructure, when the internet was around, we still had to lay cable, we had to lay fiber optic afterwards, and so forth, and then we went wireless. But all of the infrastructure to make it work is there, and when I think we can have these kind of acceleration leaps and jumps when some of that existing infrastructure becomes fully enabled to adopt the technology, and that is where maybe some of these rapid accelerations will be triggered by.
Interesting point. What another point I would like to discuss with you is we already now see a couple of sub industries in the blockchain area where companies have been emerged, right? Primarily the exchanges. I think that's the number one. Then we also see now analytics companies for AML analytics, which have grown significantly. Then we have some infrastructure companies which are strongly growing. Matthew, that would be you and your peers, right? We have custody companies and custodians, which are at least on the way to grow. What else do we have, and what else will we have? Any ideas?
I think coming from the Bitcoin blockchain technology, truly decentralized, trustless, unchangeable. I think there will be many ideas of things that can be built on top of the Bitcoin blockchain. I think the Microsoft Identity Overlay Network, storing identity on a true blockchain, not a blockchain that's being controlled. I think there will be many ideas that we cannot imagine today. That those are the ideas of very crazy entrepreneurs who come up with solutions where the initial reaction will be, that's nonsense. And the more the initial reaction will be that's nonsense, the more disruptive it will be, and then the bigger it will be. So I think the point is building on top of the true Bitcoin blockchain. I think will generate tremendous value, tremendous new solutions that are hardly imaginable today. And then of course the same thing also for the other blockchains.
Interesting.
Coming back to the question how to identify a unicorn, building on what Alex was saying. I mean, these contrarian thinkers, these ideas that we think are completely insane. I mean, NFT, a few years, I said completely insane. What is this? I think it's these ideas that will change the world, and especially things like identity. They haven't even been touched yet in a real way. I mean, what is the identity of a person? It's not the passport or your identity card that you're holding. It's something else. And all the issues with banking, property management, all that are related to a lack of identity. So I would expect a lot coming from this in this area, but it's also a difficult area because it requires state actors to do something. It's not just the private space that will change it. But with regards to let's call it frontier tech in blockchain, the world is still absolutely open, and maybe that 1% of the potential has been exploited so far.
Interesting point. Very interesting point. I also would agree. Identity.
Maybe to add up. Maybe to quickly add up. I think we can look at certain areas though. Like for example, I went to a Sparkasse 2 weeks ago. Since 10 years, first time. I rarely go to banks, and for me, there was a beautiful reminder, especially if endowed with current crypto prices once in a while. I think every single service like that's presented in a bank, like if you go to Sparkasse, hypothetically can be rebuilt on a decentralized solution. And that's like also like, I think that's a very concrete area where, like, oh, there's like 50 to 100 different use cases of products that are all part of this one ecosystem of banks. And they, I think, can largely one by one be built on decentralized systems. And then I think we already have some orientation point, because then it's not just like some crazy, like far-fetched idea of things that we can't imagine yet. Like, for example, if you look in the gaming space, that's for me one of the craziest areas. Like, who would have thought that 10 years ago, like Twitch is a $1 billion company today. They just exited to Amazon. Like Twitch is a company where people spend their time on the platform to watch other people play video games and even pay money on top. I think any person you would have told that like 10 years ago, they would have said like, this is crazy, like no one would do this. So in some industries, I think it's much harder to predict, like for example, what happens in gaming and NFTs in that context. But with banks, I think it's an interesting start to go with.
Can I add one other thing? Like, it's been around for a couple of years, but there's this a fan-controlled football league in the US. So they have like American football, it's arena football, and the fans that own the token, they can call the plays. And so I think there are a lot of ways that where Benjamin is mentioning kind of the let's say the fully digital world going towards new things in gaming, also in the physical world where fans are so engaged with their team. And I know in Germany there are also teams that are fan owned, and I think some of them are even traded on the stock exchange. But you have this already. I think we'll see a lot of stuff in sports as well, and whether that's fan controlled activities or engagement or participation in the future earnings of athletes and all the. I think the sporting area, gaming and sporting, they kind of will see a lot of acceleration over the next couple of years. But I think one other trend, and there was just an announcement out today about Aave launching a KYC enabled DeFi DeFi solution. So whereas I think that DeFi, it's grown immensely and got to 50 billion in locked-in capital in the wild, if I can put it that way. So without all of the taking into account the regulatory requirements that would not typically be expected and required. But now when you add in KYC, and that makes it, or KYB and all that, and institutional investors can start to enter the space. There you also, so combining something that complies with the regulations with a decentralized protocol or DeFi application is another moment where we'll see, and the companies so long story short about investing, companies that are combining and making the decentralized world or the DeFi world more accessible to a broader, outside of the 1% and into the 99% of the others who are not yet in the space. Those are where you can find also promising opportunities for investment.
Interesting points. Yeah, this brings me to another, we now discussed multiple domains where we should see some growth, and with this also some unicorns, for example, identity, gaming, sports, and then Benjamin, you mentioned finance, right? But we also see one pattern, right? We see growth where there is no regulation or where you can somehow work around regulation, because finance can be split up into a crypto domain, being decentral with this being not regulated, or finance being regulated and somehow complying or trying to comply with rules, and then everything slows down tremendously, right? So what's your take on this? Because look at Bitcoin. Everybody waited for institutional investors to come. Alexander, we talked about this. We are waiting for 2 years, and what happened? Nothing. And where is growth coming from? From El Salvador and other countries, right? That's interesting to see, because also our expectations have been wrong, because I would have expected that by this year, institutionals are really entering the Bitcoin and crypto space. And well, yes, they are here and there, but it's not a strong movement, right? It's some growth here and there, and therefore, therefore, I would like to ask all of you, what's your take on regulation? Is regulation enabling growth once you are complying with it, or is regulation hindering growth, such that growth can still happen when you are bypassing it somehow by, for example, becoming decentral? Yeah, any stakes on this? It's a difficult question. Any opinion here? Matthew, you are obviously entering the regulated space.
Yeah, but I think that we can look at what's happening in the unregulated space is basically, as it does tend to happen on a much smaller scale than the regulated space. We can view it as a petri dish and see, okay, what are the great ideas that are in this Cambrian environment are evolving as leaders in a decentralized space, and what additional thing do I need to add? And in the case of Aave putting KYC on a DeFi protocol, they're doing it. So I think, Philip, maybe before the end of the year's out, your wish will come true, and institutionals are really coming in and en masse, because the solutions are coming. But it's looking at the decentralized technologies. If we want to really grow, of course, we need the broader public to come in, and that does require complying to some extent with regulations, or regulations being modified. Regulations being modified takes a longer time than putting in a solution that complies with the current regulation with a decentralized application. So I think the shorter path to growth in the sector is combining some element of the regulation that makes it compliant, and then you can benefit more broadly from what's happening in the Wild West, or in the petri dish of DeFi.
Interesting point. Who wants to add something on this?
I mean, quickly from my side, I think we've touched upon this. So I think it's about dependency relationships then, right? So I guess regulation is required for certain industries because they just have to play by certain rules. And the more there's like touch points between like this physical, this digital with the physical world, I guess the more we probably need to talk about regulation and interaction. I mean, something that's pretty extreme in this case, for example, that I find super interesting is like a project called Decentraland. Maybe some of you have heard it. It's a top 100 coin. It has almost $1 billion market cap. And it's basically a video game that's built on a decentralized layer. And it's actually crazy because you can enter like a completely digital world. There's basically no connection to any physical rights. Everything is digital. And you can literally, like, there's casinos that are being built inside a virtual world where you can play with real Bitcoin against other people. So everything is virtual. there's betting markets where you can bet on political, like political stuff or like sports or whatever you want. And there's also no connection to the physical world. So I think that's why these things like grow like much quicker, at least to a certain point, because then for the big players to enter with the real money, then again, they have a lot of like real world implications of real world rules. And I guess that's why, from my perspective, from my observation, regulation always matters at a certain size.
Yeah, interesting point. Yeah, we are soon also coming to an end, unfortunately, but I would like to ask every one of you, what would you recommend to young people, or maybe not so young people who are working at a bank, who might see their job becoming obsolete in a couple of years? What should this person do? Should this person read books or papers? Should it listen to podcasts? Should it start programming? What would you recommend, or like even more so to young people, you know, coming out of school, studying, having at least more time than we do? What would you recommend to young people listening to this webinar? Should they now start a startup? Should they join an existing one? Should they develop programming skills? What would be your recommendation?
My recommendation is follow your passion. So I think the passion, really, you feel it. It's of course a conscious process, but it's also a emotional subconscious process. And I had the opportunity to join a Clubhouse meeting with where Elon Musk and Mark Andreessen were discussing stuff. And it was in February, and I tweeted right after it was very early in the morning, and I tweeted, if I was young, if I was 22 and smart, I would either work on Bitcoin or for Elon Musk. And I think that the message is we work on something big and new with a strong leader. That would be the Elon Musk, trying to fly to Mars and hopefully back. And then, of course, Bitcoin. But I think it's huge, huge, huge. And of course, it could be also other blockchain technology. And I think if you're young and you have enough time, you can take much bigger risks than when you're 50 plus, because you don't have much time left to make up for mistakes or failures. And you bet on big things. Don't bet on small things. Bet on big things. But everything is okay. I mean, being young, have a regular 9-to-5 job, and have a family is also totally fine. But if you have the opportunity, work on something really big, and that would be clearly blockchain or Elon Musk.
Okay.
Maybe to build on that, I'd suggest to any young people to learn as much as they can about technology, because then they can take a knowledgeable decision on where their field of work may be and how their current sphere may change in the future. I mean, how did I learn about blockchain? I took a Philip's class, what's it called? 30 days, how to get proficient in blockchain. I think it's 2 years old now or so. And there is so much on the internet. So just like everybody in business has to be fluent in English these days, I think you have to be fluent in at least, well, maybe not fluent, but you have to understand the basics of blockchain technology. Just like 20 years ago, people learned about the internet technology. You don't have to be a technical expert, but you have to, it's almost a philosophy. You have to understand what may happen to society and how this technology may impact it.
I think maybe I would add something to that, a bit of a different angle. So of course, I would say get into blockchain. That's your future can depend on it. But the more important thing, more practically, is I think coming out of university, myself included, at a younger age, I had the idea of I want to work for this company, or I want to work for that company, or I want to work in that industry or that industry. You know, it's very specific. And what I would advise people to do is don't worry so much about the company or the industry, worry about the people that you're going to work with. So get to know your boss. There's nothing worse than starting your career with an asshole. So find a great person that can mentor you and be there to support you in your development and growth, and that'll take you a lot farther rather than getting into the bank you want to get into or the consulting company you want to work for. Get hired by a great person. And that's probably in line with what Alex is saying with Elon Musk.
Yeah, that is so true.
He might be an asshole. I don't know, but I think, I mean, what he did. I mean, the vision, the persistence, and in the end also the success. Not just the Tesla car, but the Starlink satellite internet network, the ambition to fly to Mars, where everybody says it's not going to work, and then it will work. And so many other things. I think great ambition early allows for failure, of course, but it also allows for huge successes. And you know, banks are just, you know, maybe probably dead. So don't work for a bank, and don't work for an old industry, and just have the vision, the opportunity, the conviction, the persistence to work on something big.
Benjamin, now what's your advice?
Well, it ties in a bit into what I think you guys already said. So number one, try to get as much exposure as possible and as early as possible. Different experiences, different tasks, different industries, different cultures and countries. So I think it's much smarter to work really, really hard if you're young and then benefit from the compound interest. Like the older you get, you can keep working hard, but it's easier, I think, to work less if you get older than the other way around. At least that's how I like to look at it. And the second point is to be super selective with who you work with. I think something that's really important is that you, like you already, I think, said, is with mentorship, that you're not surrounded by people who are feared or scared of being outgrown. I think that's like super important. I think a big mistake that I see a lot of people do in life, at least from my perspective, as far as I can judge from my age, is that a lot of people are really scared of not being the smartest guy in the room. And I think if you're looking for growth, then I think you should consciously try your best constantly to specifically not be the smartest person in the room.
Yeah, Matthew, please.
Just one shameless plug. We're growing at Settlement, so if there are people on the call that are interested in looking for their first job, we're looking to change jobs. We've hired about 6 people in the last 2 months, and 3 of them are from Germany. So we're looking for more team members to join. So if you're looking for an exposure in a great company to the blockchain space, then send me a note and let's be in touch.
Perfect. And I have 2 final recommendations I would like to make. Actually, I read the career book from the Facebook CEO. What's her name again? I forgot it.
Sheryl Sandberg?
Yes, exactly.
Sheryl Sandberg.
She wrote this career book, Lean In. I think it's for women, but anyway, it's also was interesting for me as well. And she said that it's a very good advice to follow growing things, you know, like growing companies such as Matthews, growing technology such as blockchain, growing countries such as, who knows, China or what else. So follow growing ecosystems, because then you will also grow with this ecosystem. And coming from a university, I would also advise people to not just read, but, you know, do some programming. You know, don't read how to program, you know, don't read how to program, really program, and don't read how to write. Instead, sit down and do write, and don't read how to do marketing. Instead, run a podcast, you know, like do things. I think this is so important because universities and also in schools, people are often educated on a meta level, you know, how you could potentially do things if some conditions are in place, and people are very often not educated in really operatively sitting down and doing things. I think that's a missing part in education here and there, also in schools. And yeah, with this, I think we had a very nice round. We not just talked about unicorns, but I think it was an interesting topic also about sub-trends in the ecosystems. And I think there were some very interesting points. I also answered at least 2 questions which came from the audience indirectly. Thanks much. Any remarks left from somebody to the audience?
Well, I also shamelessly have to plug. So if anyone is related to a startup in the blockchain space or knows anyone, we appreciate every application, and yeah, looking for the next big thing in the blockchain space always.
My handle on most of the social networks and everywhere is just do it, Alex, and that's the message. Just do it.
Excellent. Thanks. That's a good closing word. Thanks to every one of you, and talk to you soon, hopefully, and meet you soon, hopefully. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.